Okay, here we go. All right, welcome in everyone. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. As people are coming in, we would love to hear from you in the chat box as we begin our program design masterclass. Let us know where you're joining us from today in the big world we're in, and also what you hope to learn from today. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat box. You can toggle to everyone so we can all see your responses. And we're looking to know where you're joining us from and what you hope to get out of today's session. So we will jump right into it, actually. I'm Beth, and I'm from the certification team here at CanFit Pro. I'm just delighted to be your host for this program design masterclass. Thank you so much for being here. And we also have Mary, who is going to be moderating the chat box for us and watching for your questions and popping in resources there for you. And then, of course, we have Eddie Panting and Jason Jones, who are our presenters today, our experts on program design, and they're going to take us through an amazing interactive session in just a moment. But first, we are going to get started with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of joining together virtually from many different locations, I will begin this session by acknowledging the Indigenous people of all the lands we are on today. And I do this from my heart and with deep respect. So if you are participating from somewhere in North America, you are standing upon ancestral and unceded territory of Indigenous people. I'm a settler, and as a settler, I recognize and appreciate all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who are stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity. And I'm so very grateful that Indigenous people continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Now, you may know the month of June is National Indigenous History Month, and I hope that you are noticing extra effort in your community to recognize the rich history, heritage, resilience, and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. You'll see a number of Indigenous CanFit Pro members are highlighted this month on our social media and in our blog posts, as well as presenters at our CanFit Pro Global Conference and Trade Show coming up in August. So just remember, it's important that we build relationships and learn from Indigenous ways of knowing all year round, not just in June. And for now, I do want to invite you to connect with everyone who's on this call virtually to just take a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and to consider how we each in our own way can move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And I do encourage you to learn and enhance your connection with the first people of your geographic area. So we do have a few online resources that Mary is going to pop into the chat so that you can continue your own exploration, okay, of learning. All righty. So what are we getting up to today? We are going to have Eddie and Jason take us through an overview of different periodization styles and the different programs we can put together using these different styles, block, linear, and wave loaded. You're really going to learn how to optimize your programming to help your clients get results. And you're going to increase your commitment, help increase your commitment with your clients, because really this is about selling as a helping tool in personal training. Overall, you're going to come away with great frameworks to create comprehensive, client-centric programming efficiently, and that it gets results for your clients and for you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our presenters for today. So we have with us Eddie Panting. Eddie is a personal trainer and fitness manager from Winnipeg, Manitoba. He has over 14 years in the industry and multiple certifications. He is also well known for his advocacy work in mental health. So he does a lot of really important work in the area of support and counseling on post-traumatic stress disorder for men in his local community. So everybody, please welcome Eddie Panting. We also have with us Jason Jones, who is a personal trainer in Toronto, Ontario. Jason has over 13 years of experience in personal training. He's also a subject matter expert and a facilitator of CanFit Pro courses and exams as a pro trainer. So Jason is a fantastic community builder. He is really knowledgeable about inclusive fitness, and he's got such a great way of breaking down complex topics in ways that make sense for both his clients and for his students. And you'll also see that Jason's a big fan of Captain America. So we're very happy to have Jason here with us. Now, Eddie and Jason are both presenting at the CanFit Pro Global Conference and Trade Show in August 10th to 14th. So this session today is a great introduction to block periodization and program design and linear and wave programming and periodization. And Eddie and Jason are going to take us even deeper into those topics, and you're going to get great hands-on coaching, more client examples and case studies, more templates for programs when you attend in person at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre on Friday, August 12th. Eddie and Jason are both going to be presenting there. So it is my absolute pleasure to pass it over to Eddie, who's going to take us first through a really great overview of periodization and some programming fundamentals.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Beth, for the very kind introduction. I will do my best to live up to that and keep up to the legend Jason Jones here. So we're going to start with just why we periodize, right? So periodization can feel like a daunting and a little bit of an overwhelming concept, especially when you first get into personal training. So we're going to talk about why we do it. So obviously our client success plan, injury risk management, research on hypertrophy. So really when we're thinking of periodization, I want you to think about long-term planning, right? And if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So it's to show our clients that we truly care about their long-term success and that this time with our support, they're going to succeed. And it's to ensure as trainers, we meet our clients where they are. So we need to take into account injury risk management, research on hypertrophy, developing a base before training the entirety of the force velocity curve. So these accompanied by lifestyle coaching that they're going to receive from you will ensure that we can reduce the incidences of relapse and prevent plateaus. So to ensure that we set our clients up for long-lasting changes, that's going to allow them to make training part of their identity and to train like an athlete at any age, right? And I think that there's a lot of value in that. You know, people feel competent and confident when they feel strong and capable, and we want to be able to provide that for our clients. So as we get into the next section here, we're going to talk a lot about programming terms. So Jason and I are going to be using some terminology some of you may be familiar with. For some people, it may be brand new. So I wanted to give a quick rundown on some of the key terminology that we're going to be using to help expand and understand, you know, what we're talking about in the presentation. So the first thing is going to be our mains. So mains can be known as the builders, your core lifts, your basic lifts. These are the lifts that the entire program is going to be built around. Okay, the primary exercises that are important to the client's goal. Our supplemental lifts, these are movements that we feel or know will make the main lifts either stronger or better from a technical standpoint. There may be 1 to 2 of these per session, and the supplemental work is about the movement, getting the movement better. Then we're going to talk about accessories. So accessories are the lifts that will support, balance, and help build the supplemental lifts. So the accessories are about the movement or the muscle, pardon me. So everything is related back to the main. So I would like you to think pattern over exercise, okay? And what I mean by that is if I want my client to hinge, so what exercises do the hinge? Right? Rather than I want my client to deadlift. So when we're thinking pattern over exercise, it removes, you know, barriers related to exercise bias by us as trainers, right? And ensures that we can remain client capacity focused. And as trainers, it's a big opportunity for a lot of us is that exercise bias, the things that we like to do that we think are the best. But that doesn't always mean it's applicable to everyone. So I really want everyone to keep in mind, think pattern over exercise specific when we're dealing with these three subjects, the main, supplementals, and accessories. So we're also going to talk a lot about reps and reserve and RPE. Jason's going to get into both of those. Reps and reserve is an estimation of how many technically sound reps you could have done extra on that set had you gone all out. And I think the key point to remember is technically sound reps, right? Not squirming underneath the bar to get it up one last time. It's talking about technically sound repetitions. Then we're going to talk about externally stabilized versus internally stabilized. So internally stabilized is something that we have to internally stabilize, right? The degree of structured support an exercise is going to get through stabilizing the core, joint stabilization, stacking the spine properly. Externally stabilized is the degree of support offered by an exercise by an external structure, right? So for example, a leg press would be externally stabilized. We're sitting in a machine, it's externally stabilized. It can only move in one plane. Then we've got a squat, for example, which would be internally stabilized, right? Our joints and core, we have to balance that weight as it moves through space. So the difference between externally and internally stabilized is going to help us understand how to program effectively based on knowing the client's core might start fatigue earlier in a session. So we want to provide more externally stabilized exercises, specifically as the workout goes on. So I'm going to pass this over to the living legend himself, Jason Jones, to explain this incredible model, who will do it in a much more eloquent way than I can. So Jason, it's all you, buddy.
Oh man, thanks for setting the bar so high. Before I get into this, I just want to give a shout out to everybody calling in from Alberta. Born in Edmonton right here. So as much as I might be in downtown Toronto right now, I love seeing my people show up. So we've got two sort of diagrams or graphs on the left-hand side here. It's the fitness fatigue impulse response model for a single training session. It's got kind of three components. The first one is fitness. That's the ability to perform whatever chosen activity you're participating in. In our case, it's going to be, the exercise that we've selected for our clients. In the long term, fitness is improved by increasing someone's strength, increases in muscle mass, these kinds of adaptations. In the short term, we may actually see an immediate skill improvement during the session through the mechanisms of post-activation potentiation. Fatigue is just the accumulation of stress that decreases a muscle's ability to perform a contraction. We might see this immediately. For some people, we may see a decrease in performance from set to set. For some people, they may be able to maintain their level of fitness capacity for an entire session. Generally speaking, it dissipates in about 48 hours. Performance is the balance of these two things together. It really just means the ability to do the work in the session or in a sporting event to do the work on the competition day. So the other graph is the Bannister IR model, which is, if you look at it, just the first model extrapolated over a larger period of time. So in the Bannister IR model, we're looking at applying the correct amount of stress and recovery so that fitness continually improves, performance continually improves, and fatigue continually dissipates, but also does not increase. So we're not seeing that after every additional session, the person is additionally more fatigued. They should be not entirely fresh, but pretty much the same level of fresh from session to session. And we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies for how to meet somebody where they are. So we have a case study on our next slide, which is, oh, no, sorry, you're up, Eddie, back to you.
All right, fair enough. We'll finish up these best practices and then shoot it back to Jason. So a couple just best practice stuff that we wanted to share in regards to just overall program design, no matter what type of periodization format that you're following. So we want to talk about mobility and stability, the rule of 2 horizontal pulls for every push, and then the three variables that we're always in control of, which is time, distance, and load. So while increasing mobility is important, without stability, it can lead to greater risk of injury. So, you know, in the last few years in the fitness industry, we've seen a lot of talk about mobilization and mobility, and it has an incredible value. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But we also want people to understand that you have to stabilize after you mobilize. It's a really important thing to do. We're going to discuss that in depth. But because I don't want to feel like I'm just lecturing to a bunch of people, why don't we jump into the chat and talk about mobility and stability? So if we were going to define mobility, how would we define that? So I'm going to send it to the floor, throw it in the chat. How would you define mobility? So we've got movement, the ability to move. Iris, move a joint through range of motion. Beautiful. So if we're going to keep it nice and simple, mobility is the ability to move through a full range of motion. Okay. So now let's talk about stability. Okay. So let's shoot it back to the chat. We've got some great engagement. Let's go back to the chat. How would we define stability? So we know mobility is to move a joint through its full range of motion. What would mobility be? Or stability, pardon me. Strengthen all those ranges of motion. Fair. Excellent, excellent. So stability, the ability to maintain or control joint movement or position. Okay, like maintain spine alignment when holding a load in one hand so you don't tip over, or structuring your shoulder properly so you can maintain load in that arm. So expecting performance from an unstable joint is like firing a cannon from a canoe. This is a common analogy we give a lot in regards to, right, if you're mobilizing a joint a lot before you get into exercise, it's unstable, right? So you want to stabilize that joint to make sure it can generate force properly, you know, during the exercise. So if you think of a cannon sitting in a canoe in water and you fire that cannon, right, what's going to happen to the canoe? It's going to flip over and tip, right? Because there's no stability to generate force. You take that cannon, put it on the ground, a stable joint, you'll be able to generate force in a much safer environment, okay? So then we're going to talk about the 2 horizontal pulls for every push for most individuals. So when we talk about horizontal pulls versus vertical pulls, okay? I want to do 2 horizontal pulls over time, not just in the same workout over the length of the program, for every push, okay? The main reason is the lat is an internal rotator of the shoulder, okay? So if I'm doing a lot of vertical pulling, I'm still internally rotating that shoulder, which is the same thing I'm doing in a pushing motion. So excessive vertical pulling in a program will contribute to what was called upper crossed syndrome, right? That kyphotic posture, internally rotated shoulders, or further perpetuate poor standing posture and the complications that are related to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and clarify a few things, but then we've got, you know what, I'll talk about it now. So standing posture has been shown to have little to no carryover to athletic performance. However, there is substantial research now showing high relation of standing posture in self-image and self-worth and confidence. Okay, so when we train our clients to be successful in life, not just in the gym, we want to address things like standing posture. Okay, so in regards to the variables, time, distance, and load. So these are, you know, the 3 variables that we're always in control of on every set, every rep, and are malleable on the fly depending on the client capacity. Okay, so time is rest periods you give, the tempo or time under tension, right? If I increase rest and decrease time under tension, things get easier. If I take no rest and make really long reps that take, 4 seconds down, 2-second pause, I don't have to add weight. That increases difficulty. Load is obviously the amount of resistance we're applying to a movement, whether that's weights, bands, water resistance, whatever it's going to be. And then distance is the moment arm of the exercise, right? So how long the movement is going to be. So if you think, a full depth squat is harder than a quarter squat because you're working through a full range of motion. So lightweight with no rest or long time under tension is hard. So you don't always have to increase load to increase difficulty, especially when dealing with injury risk, okay? Distance can be applied over time for increased range of motion under load. So without going too far down a rabbit hole, if you have a client that maybe isn't able to do overhead movements, right? They're limited in their range of motion and stability in their external rotation. So maybe they did wall slide test and they don't pass. Instead of just constantly working in this plane in horizontal pressing, what we can do is we can start them on a flat bench, right? Over 6 weeks, increase that 15 degrees. So next week they're here, the week after they're here, the week after they're here, until they're pressing overhead. So we use distance actually over time, not just in one exercise or one workout. We used changing the distance of the exercise over time to help increase their range of motion and their mobility, as well as their stability. So the last couple key points here before I pass it back to Jason, we get into the nitty gritty of program design, specifically block with Jason, is these are maybe some conjecture. My opinion, I share most of them with Jason, is some best practices. So the best program is the one your client is actually going to follow. Okay, so client compliance is the key to successful programming. We're going to talk a lot about the science of periodization today, but keeping your programs customized to the individual along with their lifestyle needs and personality matter. There's no one size fits all approach. So learn about your clients as people first. That's going to give you the ability to program for them. The basics aren't boring. Instagram worthy exercises look cool online, but the reality is the basics have existed this long for a reason. Okay, keep things simple. Don't overthink every exercise to make it flashy. Do what works and it gets results. Okay, and then to steal the incredible Bruce Lee's quote, right? Be like water, my friend. So what I mean by that is go with the flow. If you're supposed to be hitting 85% of a 1 RM today, because that's what the program says so, and we're going to talk about percentages, but your client arrives on a lack of sleep, they've got no food, maybe a really stressful day, maybe today isn't the day for going for 85%, okay? Don't be rigid in your approach if it's going to be detrimental to your client. Don't make excuses for them, but also don't create more problems, right? Learn the line with each client and then know how to manage them from there. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Jason. We're going to talk about our case study of the day, and Jason's going to take it away. All yours, my friend.
Awesome. Shout out to Chad Benson, who actually did a study, acute neuromuscular response to resistance training performed at different loads, which is probably one of the sort of foundational studies in training to failure, not necessarily being optimal. So when I talk a little bit more about auto-regulation later on today, we have an auto-regulating OG in the class today, which is pretty awesome. All right, so we have a case study here, Zara. Zara was a long distance runner in her 20s and into her 30s. Zara got hit by a car. She had some surgeries to repair some of the damage, did physiotherapy for recovery. During this time period, had 2 kids. Now that her second kid is off to preschool, Zara wants to get back to fitness. Zara is worried that her injuries and her age will hold her back. She's worried about re-injuring some of the things that she hurt in the car accident. And as a goal, she is a body composition client. So she wants to look fitter again and lose inches, but is not necessarily concerned with weight loss. So we've chosen block periodization as our starting model for Zara. And the reason that we've selected block periodization is that block periodization is easy to translate to a client. It's very easy to explain to them how block periodization is going to work. So block periodization works on the principle that we work on 1 fitness capacity per mesocycle. Traditionally, a mesocycle is 3 to 6 weeks in length. On the next slide, we've broken it down into a couple different components, with the foundation being longer. Different fitness capacities accrue at different individual rates. Different energy systems adapt at different individual rates. Both of these decay at different but predictable rates. So we've got some sample fitness capacities in the table there. So max strength takes about 3 to 5 weeks to start to decay. That means that strength tends to be a fairly persistent adaptation. Power may start to decay in only 1 week. So there's a real skill component to power exercise. Energy systems also decay. So the oxidative system starts to decay after about 4 to 5 weeks, the glycolytic system after about 2 to 3 weeks, and the ATP-CP system after about a week. So there's an obvious link here between the energy systems and the fitness capacity and the rate at which they decay. You can really get into the weeds about that, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. Typically in block periodization, blocks are broken down into accumulation, intensification, realization, and a fourth block called restoration, which really is a deload, which is something Eddie's going to talk a lot about. In order to simplify things, both for ourselves as trainers, but also for our clients, to make it really approachable and accessible, we've broken blocks down into foundation, hypertrophy, and strength, and then each block into different volumes. This makes it a lot more descriptive. Eddie will talk about the inverse relationship between volume and intensity in greater detail when he gets to linear periodization. But generally speaking, a single block is advanced linearly, and it increases intensity as it decreases in volume. Now we have an example here of a 6-month training plan. And the reason we have a 6-month training plan is because our client has committed to 6 months of training. We want to be able to present this during an initial client intake. That means one thing that we want to do is we want to have templates prepared. So this looks very much like a template, which means we can have this ready to go. If it's ready to go, we make success for ourselves a lot easier. If we have the knowledge to make plans that work, and we can convert those plans into a system or a template, we can easily set our clients up for success, which means we're also easily setting ourselves up for success. Our clients get results, and we get paid. We get to have a career. So looking at this, keeping in mind the case study of Zara, under the training effects, what would some specific training effects someone like Zara would experience? So pop into chat what you guys think some personalized effects that would happen to Zara if she were to follow a plan like this under your guidance. And don't everybody clog chat with your ideas all at once. Better sleep and increased energy. Yeah, so stuff that she might notice right away, increase in energy can happen after the first week. Leaner and stronger, injury prevention, increased self-confidence. I love that. I love that she's not too old to get started. There is no such thing as too old. So I just want to make a quick note here. Under the description, we have RPE, which is largely interchangeable with reps in reserve. And that on none of these are we doing an RPE 10. So if we've programmed well and effectively, Zara should ideally not hit failure at all on any of her lifts. But if she does, she shouldn't do it very often. On the topic of RPE and reps in reserve, pop into chat. Does anybody here currently use RPE or reps in reserve with your clients and with yourself? To see if anyone's using that. Getting a lot of yeses. Pretty even split between RPE and RIR. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the brief history of how we got into RPE and reps in reserve. And I find this personally really, really interesting. And it would be a pet project of mine. If anyone out there has like a bajillion dollars they would like to give to me, I would love to travel all over the world and put together a documentary on the history of personal training and exercise. As a basic sort of concept, the idea of leaving some reps in the tank started with Jim Wendler's 5-3-1. So 5-3-1 as a training program starts by reducing your training max to 90% of your 1 rep max. So if you're following 5-3-1, within the first 4 weeks, you should never hit failure. You should never hit your 1 rep max. And at the time, this was 2007, this was a stark contrast to taking every single set to failure in the gym among powerlifters and bodybuilders. So the program prescribed reps at a given percentage, and then there was an optional rep out or AMRAP on the very last set, with the option of just not completing it. You did not have to do it. You could stop at 1. So this led to the idea of leaving a rep or 2 in the tank. Louis Simmons of Westside Barbell started incorporating speed work or dynamic work into his programming. And that was work that was done quickly and intentionally not done to failure. And so this was kind of the genesis of auto-regulation, or what we like to call not killing yourself pointlessly in the gym. Defining auto-regulation, it's the maintenance of relative consistency of a physiological process, like building muscle or building strength. In training, adapting or adjusting training variables based on daily fluctuations in individual performance is a critical component of what we're going to be doing. There's lots of reasons for fluctuations in performance. And Eddie mentioned some of these already. It could be really simple things like not getting enough sleep. It could be increases in allostatic load. And allostatic load is the name for the sum total stress that an individual is experiencing. So that could be stress from 2 kids. That could be stress from a job. That could be stress from their job going through a merger and acquisition. If somebody works in accounting or taxes, there's tax season where stress is going to go up. Could be changes in nutrition, could be bachelor or bachelorette parties, birthday parties, things like that. We need different strategies that are being adopted, researched, and pioneered for autoregulation. So some of these strategies may be things like rate of perceived exertion, reps in reserve, max recoverable volume and minimum effective volume, and then bar velocities, which can be measured with a camera or a device that you can attach to a bar. When we're talking about using RPE or reps in reserve with our clients, we want to clearly describe RPE or RIR, depending on what your preference is to use. You're going to find that some clients will work really well with RPE and some with RIR, and they're largely interchangeable. So you can record whatever works for the individual, or you can just convert it in your head. RPE tends to be more accurate with higher volume sets, basically when we're performing higher repetition. Reps in reserve tends to be more accurate when we're doing higher intensities and lower reps. Once you've introduced and discussed these concepts with your clients, you can establish guidelines. So let's say, for example, I want Zara to do a set at an RPE of 7, put 100 pounds on the bar. Zara does 6 reps. She turns to me and she says, yeah, that was like an 8 or an 8.5. I want it to be a 7, so I'm going to reduce the load. If she turns to me and she says it's a 6 or a 6.5, I'm going to add more weight to the bar. I'm going to check in on every set and I'm going to adjust accordingly so that the overwhelming majority of the sets that Zara does are exactly difficult enough for her. How many people here train to failure on every set currently? Let's pop that into chat. How many people are currently training to failure? I love the emphasis on no with multiple O's. Not very often, never. It's really great to see that shift in the industry. So when we look at meta-analysis and research reviews, or initial studies like by Chad Benson, we're finding more and more that training to failure isn't any more effective for strength and hypertrophy gains than leaving a few reps in reserve. It's totally unnecessary to train harder than you have to. Now, for those who said yes in the chat, as trainers, we enjoy working hard. Training hard, it's a part of who we are. It's a part of our identity. For our clients, it's not. It's a lot less taxing and more rewarding for them to train in that effective sweet spot. Having said that, though, training to failure does not appear to be necessarily detrimental to strength and hypertrophy. Training to failure for advanced clients may actually be more effective. And I personally believe that there is a mental toughness or resiliency benefit to taking especially simple exercises to failure. Doing like a max set of push-ups, for example, is going to be something that's going to help someone build mental resiliency and pushing through to more difficult areas than they thought was necessarily possible for them. Going to failure from time to time can also help ourselves and our clients to calibrate their reps in reserve and their RPE. So if they think they have 2 reps in reserve, we take it to failure and they actually do 10 more. Okay, they're underestimating what they're capable of. So that's some data that we can use, but it's not something that we would do very often. So we have a couple of tables here that I think really put this into perspective. So a stimulating rep is a repetition that's hard enough to recruit enough motor units to stimulate some kind of an adaptation. Hard enough to make someone stronger, hard enough to build muscle, hard enough to improve muscular endurance. If you look at the table and it's circled in blue, using loads that exceed 5 rep max reduces the total number of stimulating reps you can do. So we look at the top here, if we do a 3 rep max, that means we do 3 stimulating reps and we get a lot of fatigue. If we want 3 stimulating reps, we could do 3 reps at a 5 rep max and we'd still have 2 reps in reserve. That would generate a lot less fatigue. The graph or illustration on the right is called the envelope of function. It's a physiotherapy model of rehabilitation. But for us, supraphysiological overload is the gain zone. This is why we periodize, right? Keeping our clients in that sweet spot where they don't have to work harder than necessary, but we're making sure that they're working hard enough to get that progressive overload and stay in that sweet, sweet gain zone. For the first 6 months, we should be able to meet our clients' recovery demands by avoiding failure and using either RPE or reps in reserve to dial them into that sweet, sweet gain zone. Now, here we have a scale of RPE and reps in reserve. This is in the new textbook. And how you choose whether you want to use RPE or RIR, that's kind of up to you. This is an overview. I personally like to keep things really simple. I tell my clients that a 10 out of 10 means it's the hardest set that they could possibly do. They cannot do another rep. They cannot do more weight. I tell them that an 8 out of 10 means it's a pace that they feel like they could comfortably keep up, but the last couple of reps are hard. And if a client tells me a 6, that means it just wasn't hard enough. In this table, we've got the speed of the last rep. And that really is what you as the coach can see. That's what your coach's eye can detect. It helps you to discuss the difficulty with your client so you can help them calibrate their level of accuracy, whether they're using RPE or reps in reserve. So we have the full 6-month training again that we can look at. And I've had many of my clients for over 10 years. This is 6 months of training right here. 10 years of training starts with the first 6 months. And the idea of signing up for 10 years of training might seem really daunting. But just imagine what you as a trainer, or even as a human being, would be able to accomplish if you had 10 years of training. And I don't just mean physically, how much of an athlete or a specimen you would be. Imagine the kind of person you could be if you had 10 years of continuous unbroken success and the support of someone who's always in your corner. That'd pretty much make you unstoppable, right? Now, imagine that's the product that you're selling. Because it is. That is the product that we're selling. We're selling continuous unbroken success with somebody in your corner to make sure that every time you show up, it's just win, win, win. Now everybody got sent some handouts, and the handouts are breaking down a couple of different blocks that we would be working with Zara in. So in a foundations block, we're looking at this here and we see we've already filled it in, but we've left some blanks. For the supplementals, looking at what we're doing for the mobility, the stability, and the mains, and that this is a foundation phase. Somebody pop in a chat here, let's get some answers. What would you program for the supplementals and the accessories to maximize what Zara would be getting? Yeah, horizontal pulling, absolutely. TRX rows, reverse lunges. Iris, it's almost like we've worked together in the past or something. Change planes. Yeah, get some movement in through multiple different planes of movement. We're going to keep in mind this is foundation, what Eddie was saying about trying to do horizontal pulls to vertical pulls, make sure that we get more in. Split squats, lunges. Yeah, these are great supplementals, because now we're looking at stuff that's going to build movement quality, but still has some level of internal stabilization. So what would some accessories be? So accessories, we're looking at stuff that's going to be more likely to be externally stabilized. What would be some good externally stabilized exercises? Oh, yeah, yes, Alana, everybody has been messaging them directly to me. Make sure you put them in chat to everybody, folks. Try variation on one leg. We're looking for external stabilization. How could we stabilize that, Dale? Leg press. Yeah, leg press is a great answer. If we want to do a single leg exercise, we could do a single leg press. We could also use the TRX for added stability. So if we want to increase the amount of external stability, do a single leg exercise, we could use a TRX. We could have them hold on to something, hold on to the rack. In pre-COVID days, I would say that they could hold on to us or hold on to our hands, but we're going to be a little bit more careful about that these days. All right, so if we're looking at, we have our next handout, which is the hypertrophy high volume. So if we're looking at hypertrophy high volume, and on this one, we put the mobility and stability, but we left the mains and the accessories blank. So the mains and accessories, what would we do for a main, hypertrophy high volume? I think my chat hicked up for a second there because I got nothing and then a whole bunch of things. We got hinge, deadlift, RDL, hamstring curls. Awesome. So we're seeing a lot of slightly regressed, so easy for our client to do, hip hinge exercises, hip thrusts. We already have hip thrusts as a supplemental, so we maybe want to go a little bit harder. I think that RDLs and trap bar deadlifts would be our big winners on here. What would be maybe an upper body main that we would do? I know that this handout has all lower body, but what would be upper body? Bench press. Totally. If we're doing hypertrophy, I'd maybe go towards maybe a dumbbell bench press. And then what would we do for accessories? So same sort of question. We left accessories blank. Externally stabilized. What is an externally stabilized exercise that might help improve somebody's trap bar deadlift and hip thrusters? So somebody had already mentioned leg curl, hamstring curl. That would be a great example. What would another great example be? Got a direct message, glute ham raise and back extensions. And yeah, those would be two great examples. So we give Zara a program like this. where we're following our periodization. Each individual block is tailored to how she's feeling on the given day using reps in reserve and RPE. And Zara is going to be successful in her training plan. So Zara successfully lost some inches. She lost some inches off her waist, her thighs, and her arms. Zara got some sweet, sweet booty gains. Zara also felt an increase in her fitness, her energy levels, her perception of well-being, a decrease in her perception of pain following her injury. She feels confident now to return to running. So what do? Well, we're going to set some new goals around getting back to running, to which I hand off to Eddie. And Eddie, when I see you in August, I promise I won't step on your toes like I did 20 slides ago.
No problem at all, my friend. Looking forward to seeing you, buddy. So we're going to talk. So as Jason said, I think one of the big key, I mean, it was all key. It's amazing content. Coming to the end of that, he said something, I'm going to reset goals, right? Because he's dealing with a different person, right? It's not just Zara's athletic ability. It's everything about her as a person. He wants to reset and recalibrate where he wants to get her in the next 6 months. So we're going to talk about how we're going to bring that forward. So talking a little bit about linear periodization. So as Jason mentioned, linear periodization follows the basic premise of an inverse relationship between volume and intensity. So as rep ranges decrease throughout a training cycle, the intensity increases. Okay, so inverse relationship. When one goes up, the other one goes down. So this is great for beginners. Most beginners need to build a strong baseline level of strength and skill before trying advanced training styles. Linear periodization gets great results and allows you to slowly build a base without losing focus on what's important, building your skill and ability to maintain the appropriate positions under strain. So obviously we can play with other variables other than weight, limited training equipment, depending on where you're at. You can decrease rest intervals, increase tempo, change the moment arm, all the things that we've discussed before. So with beginners, this is a period that's often referred to as newbie gains, right? New people. The strength increases you see are not just related to getting stronger. So if somebody's never done linear periodization before, and they're within their first, I'd say 18 months of their training age, and training age means not how long you've been working out, but how long you've been following periodized format of training. They're going to jump up their strength. Their numbers are going to go through the roof. It's not just that they're getting 280% stronger than where they were. A lot of it has to do with skill. Their skill on those movements is getting to a higher degree, which is resulting in those changes. So they're still about to become more skilled at the movement, learning how to fire motor units more effectively and more efficiently. Learning how to brace is a really important part of that. So clients are going to see dramatic results in terms of body composition changes, strength, energy throughout their first 6 months of training. It's going to be crucial to show them their progress on this. So we've got a 1RM calculator that is going to be tossed in there. Mary is just laser on these. She's incredible. So that's a website that does your 1 rep max calculator. Free content, everybody uses it. It's awesome. You type in, what you want to hit, how many reps, and it'll calculate for you what the estimated 1RM would be. So linear periodization in this regard, you want to use a 1RM calculator. Just to be clear, when I say 1RM calculator, you're not actually testing 1 rep max. Okay, be super clear on that. When you use the calculator, typically I recommend clients, especially within their first year of training, of maximizing like 3 to 5 rep max testing, and then that'll give you the estimated 1RM. I wouldn't do less than 3 reps, especially with a newer client whose capacity, there's a lot of risk of injury and counterproductive issues there. So for beginners, when they're doing linear periodization, beginner athletes, 1RM will change constantly. So you want to redo their 1 rep max calculator every 4 weeks. So you're going to calculate, plan out your 4 weeks, recalculate where they're at, plan out the next 4 weeks. Okay, because it's going to change so consistently. More experienced athletes, people who with a higher training age, it's not going to fluctuate that dramatically in 4 weeks. So you're not going to have to do that. So for intermediate, you want to expand your rep ranges. So if you're an intermediate lifter, you could still use linear. You'd be doing, changing your rep ranges quite a bit. And for advanced lifters, so, we're going to talk about shifting into wave, or people go into conjugate as they advance. You can be an advanced lifter in linear. It's absolutely possible. It works great. You would need to do, need is a strong word. I would recommend hitting some of your weaker variations. So maybe if you're really competent in your high bar back squat, work your front squat, right? Maybe work your sumo deadlift instead of your conventional or trap. Like hit things a little bit differently on your main lifts to be able to, weaken those opportunities there, or strengthen those opportunities, pardon me. So as we move forward, just over some really basics in regards to linear periodization. So with your mains, so remember your mains are your big movements, okay? So yeah, unbelievable point Jason just made. World record setting powerlifter still uses linear, right? It's applicable for everybody. So rep ranges for your mains are going to be 3 to 10 repetitions, depending on the exercise, the ability of the client to stabilize, and the training variables that you're working with. Perfect practice, target 1 to 2 reps in reserve for those mains. So again, you're working skill sets on those mains. Your supplementals, so these are more output, okay? So the supplementals make the main better. Okay, I really want you to remember the flow of what we're doing. So your supplementals, that they're going to make either the movement better on a main, or they're going to get the movement stronger for a main. Okay, so rep ranges are relative strength to hypertrophy, which is about 4 to 12 reps with a 1 to 2 RIR. This would be a blend. Your supplementals would be blended between internally and externally stabilized exercises, again, dependent on your client. If they're really struggling to get through that first set of the sets of their mains, and it looks like they're course fatiguing, switch to externally stabilized, right? Don't put them in a compromised position. But if they're a little bit more capable, their capacity is higher, you could do internally stabilized. Again, that's very, very client dependent. And then as we move on to our accessories, so accessories are about the muscle, right? So the main is a skill set. For example, a squat. The supplementals make the main better. For example, again, a leg press. Now, when we get to the accessories are about the muscle. So what muscles did I use in the main that I can now isolate and get stronger? Okay, dealing with hypertrophy endurance. So rep ranges are hypertrophy and muscle endurance, which is 8 to 10 to infinity and beyond, okay? Then we've got our target is 0 to 2 RIR. As Jason said, this is where you could train to fatigue, but you're dealing with just an isolated muscle group and you're working on, if that's hypertrophy is your focus, and body comp and hypertrophy stuff. Or go to the 2 RIR and use reduced rest intervals. The goal is to isolate muscles and cause a response. So again, for an example, if we use squat, leg press, then maybe a leg extension. We know the quads are used in a squat in our main, we can isolate those muscles. So we're going to talk about how to progress or regress in our linear periodization. So increasing the weight is the standard for all levels. Okay, all levels, increasing the weight, higher weight, lower reps, that's the standard process of linear periodization. Think of a plane taking off. Everything just keeps getting harder and harder and harder every week, okay? Tempo changes, beginner, intermediate, or advanced. So there's a lot of value. I know Jason will dig into this a lot in his, at the CanFit Expo, talking about pauses and eccentrics, really stabilizing and increasing strength in those capacities there. You can still do that in linear, right? Working pauses and working eccentrics to build strength, tendon strength, as well as positional strength. Rep ranges. You can change those. I would recommend doing more advanced rep ranges for intermediate or advanced lifters and AMRAPs, right? So as many reps as possible to do finishers. Not for the faint of heart, maybe not super entry-level friendly in linear periodization, but it is an option, of course. Okay, so let's talk about our phases. So I'm going to give an example here. I'm going to give two examples. These are just examples. There's a million out there. So this is going to show how to phase your mains. So when I show these examples, this is specifically just for the mains. So each phase is going to last 3 to 4 weeks. And each phase, so for phase 1, I'm going to do 4 by 10. Okay, for the first 3 to 4 weeks, I'm doing 4 by 10 on my mains, then 4 by 8, then 5 by 6, then 5 by 5, right? So obviously the load is going to increase over that time, which is why the reps are coming down. Remember the inverse relationship, okay? So you're going to start each phase using 2 reps in reserve of their 1 RM. So using the calculator. So as Jason said earlier, we're never going to 100%, right? That's, as he explained, cost benefit ratio on that, probably not the best. So adding weight weekly. So absolutely, block and linear absolutely overlap. Thank you, Jason. So adding weight weekly, 2.5 to 5 pounds for smaller lifts, 5 to 10 for larger lifts. And then working up to 1, 2, and 3 second pauses works great there, right? So in block 1 or phase 1, you're going 4 by 10. That block lasts 3 to 4 weeks, but within those weeks, I'm increasing the weight, right? 5 to 10, 2.5 to 5. So it's getting harder each block as well. That's that increase as we go along. So the next example is going to be a little bit more specific with percentages. So for us nerds out there who like doing the math on this stuff, you can work your percentages here. So with your percentages, this again, just an example team, you're going to do week 1 is 3 sets of 12 for the main at 68% of their 1 RM. Remember, use the calculator to find out their estimated 1 RM. Then you're going to go 68% of that. 71, 75. So as you can see, over this 7-week block of training, we're going increasing our percentages. So we're getting closer and closer to our 1 RM, right? While reducing the reps that we're doing, right? Inverse relationship again. Then at the end of these 7 weeks, you would retest your 1 RM and then just start again from week 1 with those percentages, but you're dealing with a new number, right? Because your 1 RM has increased. So 68% of the new number is going to be higher than it was to start. So it's progressively overloading over time, right? You could run this ad nauseum. You could just keep recycling and recycling. I do want to mention one common challenge with linear, just for transparency's sake, is it can get pretty rough on the body. You can get pretty beat up doing this if you're just consistently progressively overloading. Some people are genetically cut out to do this, and they can kick butt on it the whole time. I'm not exactly built for that in the best case. So yeah, don't have the frame for it for sure, but it does work and you will get very strong. But yeah, we're going to talk about how to mitigate that as we get into wave. So we're going to show some example workouts as Jason showed with the block programming. This is some linear stuff. So I gave a full example of what a linear workout could look like in these blocks. So remember, if we mobilize a joint, we got to stabilize a joint before we put it under load. So we always go mobility to stability. Got an example of a main. I put a hex bar deadlift because I'm biased and I think you should always do trap bar. So then we've got some B stance RDLs. We've got, and then I put 1 supplemental and 3 accessories on this example. So on the next example, I'm going to give 1 main, 2 supplementals, and 2 accessories. So does anybody want to take a stab in the chat of why that might shift, or what type of client? Why would I do 3 accessories instead of 2 or 2 supplementals? They would be a little goal dependent on those clients. Take a stab. Why would I do 3 accessories and 1 supplemental, or 2 accessories and 2 supplementals? Would be a potential reason for that. Yeah, strength. Great. More muscle strengthening, training age of the client. Absolutely. Oh, William's on here. Good afternoon, William. Difference between supplemental and accessory. Okay, we can bookmark some of those things. So if I've got a client who's more hypertrophy focused or maybe body composition focused, I might do more accessories, right? Their goals are less focused on big movements and strength. So I might do more accessories because that's more hypertrophy based, right? They want to do, more body composition changes. If the client has more specific performance goals, then I want to do more supplementals because the mains are the big focus, less about like the muscle building and more about those strong movements in their mains. So that's why I would do 2 supplementals over 3 accessories. Okay. So the more accessories you do, think more hypertrophy. More supplementals you're doing, you're trying to get those big lifts bigger, right? For whatever that means to you. So remember, supplementals are about the movement. Supplementals get them better. Oh, thank you, Jason. He's already ahead of the game here. Beautiful. My partner in crime has already tackled it. There you go. All right, now let's move forward into wave. So we've covered our details of linear. Now we're going to talk about wave loading. So wave loading is a programmed deload. Okay, so we're going to talk about this. So the concept of wave-loaded periodization focuses on breaking down specific training periods into 2 to 6 week blocks and undulating variables to prevent overtraining and plateaus. I'm going to make a statement of conjecture, which could be contentious. I don't believe in overtraining. I believe in under rest or under recovery. So in this case, in wave, what we're doing is we're programming, yes, for about 7 weeks. In the chat, they were asking how long they would be programming for. So in this case, we're going to program in recovery to avoid overtraining or under recovery. So as you can see from the graph on the right, the same principle applies as the progressive overload, right? So we're doing linear 1, 2, 3, drop down to deload, right? So we're programming recovery. Then the wave kicks up. That's why it's called wave. It literally looks like waves as we go. Okay. So specific training periods of 2 to 6 weeks, undulating variables, deload period, reducing the intensity or training volume. That's going to be 1 week, and it reduces the likelihood of plateaus by encouraging recovery. So I'm going to say it now, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Deload week is not a week off. This is a very common misconception, or I'm just going to go for my runs, or I'm just going to do cardio that week. That is not what a deload week is. Absolutely, you can create more time for that because you're going to have a higher capacity. However, you're still training. You're just training at a drastically reduced percentage. So you're not taxing the central nervous system in the body too much. Okay, so it's not a week off or a week of doing something completely different. You got to stick to your program, and we're going to talk about how to do that. All right, why wave loaded? So, great for intermediate to early advanced lifters. Work towards hypertrophy and body composition goals while improving strength capacity. So long-term programming, you can build up various capabilities over a long duration of time and avoid under recovery. So when we're talking about wave, wave is a very good option for people in their intermediate to early advanced. Wave is a type of training that people do like forever, similar in certain regards to block. It mimics block a lot in regards to changing the variables so that you're always avoiding plateaus. They mimic each other in a lot of ways. So with this, it's something that you can get into. I do want to be clear. I've had this question in the past. is, can you start with wave loading? Theoretically, yes, you can. Okay. What it would, the concern would be, you would have a limited ability in your skill sets and your capacity to maintain the workload necessary to make wave effective. So I've had that question a lot. The way Jason and I believe in programming at CanFit through our courses and how we teach it and the programming and pardon me, in the course manual, is you're going to, it's very progressive, right? So you're going to use those building blocks to create a better athlete, a happier person, all the things necessary, reduce injury risk. So you're not kind of skipping ahead or cutting corners. It's just you're going to reduce your ability to be effective and increase your risk of injury for yourself and your clients. So just follow the steps, best practice. So moving forward from here. So as Jason mentioned, the legendary Jim Wendler 531. So this is what the 531 looks like. Not saying it's great, bad, good. It's just conjecture. Wanted to show what it looks like as Jason brought it up. And this is a very classic form of wave loaded. Okay. Arguably the classic form because he really introduced the deload. So as we can see here, this is again, whenever we're talking about this team, we're just talking about, this is just for the mains. It's not the entire program. It's just your mains. So as we can see, week 1, week 2, week 3, you go 5, 3, 1. So your first couple sets are just warm-up sets. That's why they're at 40, 50, 60%. Then your 3 working sets, 65, 75, 85. Obviously we get up to 95% on week 3. Okay, at the bottom there. Then the key is, as I mentioned before, week 4 is not a week off. I'm going to do the same program that I've been following, but I'm not going into those heavy working sets. So I'm just doing the first 3 sets, 40, 50, 60% of my max, right? So I'm still getting the stimulus I need to keep, as Jason perfectly put it before, when we talk about the degradation of abilities, right? I'm not getting into that. I'm theoretically keeping that stimulus active so I can keep increasing the program. I'm not just taking a full week off and then the costs to my performance associated with that. And now we are going to talk about some workouts. So again, I've given an example of a program here. So this is going to show 1 supplemental, 3 accessories here. Again, one key, and I know we didn't talk about this in depth and we will at CanFit at the conference, is everything about this program has now ascended. So if you look at the mobility, stability, maybe for mobility for their hips, they were just doing 90-90 hip openers. Now they're doing banded hip distractions. The load is increasing, so the prep has to increase as well. Okay, so everything about the program is increasing in its level of intensity and complexity. So we added banded high bar squats. So now we're working in wave. A big concept of wave is accommodated resistance, bands, chains, different things that we are working there. Okay. And then we also added at the bottom for our meaningful finish. It's not just some core work. It's not basic core exercises, right? We've got a battle rope complex. We're doing something to get like that high intensity finish at the end of the workout, because remember, we can, for lack of a better term, we can push the pace a bit for those 3 weeks because we're programming our recovery on the 4th. So the intensity of the overall program can be pushed a bit because I know my client is going to get programmed recovery, right? So again, still individualized, still dealing with client capacity, but I know what's coming down the line, so I can push my client a little bit harder doing those heavier, meaningful finishes. And then we're going to go to an example here to be able to fill in a little bit. So in regards to this program, so I made it a little less filled out here on this one. So we've got a pendlay row and a face pull. So our supplemental and our face pull in our accessories. So obviously we're working pull style movements, right? So what are some mains that we could do here? What would be a great main? I've got one in mind. So this is kind of a trick question that I'm really hoping people will pick up. I will give a shout out because Beth has just recently mastered this movement. So if you follow Beth, you will see some of her movements. Chin ups, there we go. Any type of chin up, pull up. Incredible. I do want to, without getting too nerdy, because if I'm going to, I'll let Jason take this away. But pulling yourself up to something activates the muscles differently than doing a lat pull down. So I don't just want pull downs for a main. I want to pull myself up to something. If possible, if you need assistance, you could do the banded as well. So typically we want to do, hey, banded still counts, Beth, banded counts. So from there, so we've got pull ups. So now we know what we're doing with our rows. So let's talk about some accessories, right? So as we can see, we've got a superset here, right? So C1, we're going to do your face pulls, then D1, D2, we're going to get a superset. So think about, we got to think of the muscles used in those pulls. We're going to isolate them and work hypertrophy. So what are we doing when we're pulling things? What muscles can we isolate and attack? Biceps, yes, there we go. Lats, absolutely. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Posterior delts, yeah, lat pull downs, great lat pull downs, right? And now rhomboids in, oh yeah, killing it. We've got these answers. Everybody's golden here. So think about, again, think pattern over exercise. If I know this is the pattern, okay, well now what muscles do that? Pick one, isolate it, and blow it out and have some fun, right? Do your bicep curls, do your rear flies, all sorts of things like that. Mix in cables, mix in bands, mix in accommodated resistance. The accessory part of your programming team is a little bit more the fun stuff, right? Fun stuff. You can mix it up, pick a lot of different exercises. That's where you create a lot of variation in your exercises. It's where you can switch things up a little bit. If I've got Jason doing dumbbell bicep curls one week, I can still do bicep curls in the program, but maybe I'm going to do cable next time. So stimulus is a little bit different. Plus he feels like he's doing something different. He's not, but it gets him to feel like he is. So there's that excitement and variability in your programming. Put that in your accessories. And then for meaningful finish, just for one last point on that, meaningful finish is whatever the client needs the most. Okay, so meaningful finish, in what I mean by that is, if Jason likes walking out of the gym, sweating, feeling like he's left it all on the table, Jason's shaking his head, no way. If that were Jason, then great, we're going to do some prowler work, like sled pushes and a complex with battle. Like I'm going to do something so he feels like, oh, that was awesome, right? If I know there's a core dysfunction that I need to work with still, or some back pain or something that's dealing with, then I'm going to give that meaningful finish. Meaningful finish means meaningful, what that client needs to get them better for next workout and feeling good when they leave the gym. So that is my spiel on an introduction to both linear and wave loaded. And we are going to go much deeper into those at the CanFit Global Conference. So I'm going to pass this back to Beth. Thank you for your attention and participation.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Such a great presentation. Can we get some love in the chat for Jason and Eddie? It was such a great bit of education. We do have some questions, so we're going to get to those. And if you have more questions, please pop them in. We still have a bit more time in this session. But friends, we know that program design and periodized program design, really, these are areas that our members need more education on. You've told us this in the market research and the member surveys that you do. You're looking for more help with programming. So this is why we've added this session to today in our free webinar, but we also have 2 unique sessions at the CanFit Pro Global Conference and Trade Show, where you can work directly with Eddie and Jason on developing your program design skills. So you've gotten a sense of what these experts are like as educators and as coaches. You want to work with them directly. Come and join them at the Metro Toronto Convention Center on Friday, August 12th. Who's coming to the global conference in Toronto. We do also have online sessions too, but Eddie and Jason will be offering their sessions in person on Friday, August 12th. So Jason's session on block programming, you're going to learn how to schedule those blocks based on typical client goals. We had Zara today. She was body composition, but Jason's worked with a lot of folks who are interested in quality of life goals or performance goals. So definitely want to learn kind of the different strategies around programming those blocks based on different goals for clients. And with Eddie, he's going to really go a lot deeper on wave loaded and linear programming. There's just only so much we can share in like 30, 40 minutes. So he's going to go beyond the basics and get a little more sophisticated with you. But the biggest thing at these sessions is that opportunity to practice and receive feedback from Jason and Eddie directly. These are your experts. They're going to really work with you on those case studies, more workout templates, more programming ideas, and give you feedback so you can go and apply those with your clients right away. So just remember, the CanFit Pro Global Conference and Trade Show has over 165 sessions happening in Toronto and 90 sessions online. If you do join the in-person event, you get access. If you buy that 3-day pass, you get access to the 90 sessions that were online afterwards. It's just a ton of education. For personal trainers, we have a whole track of education specifically for you. And this will include sessions on coaching to optimize your client results, overcoming client mental barriers during assessments. So Jason's actually presenting on that topic as well. We know a lot of our clients really, have the fear factor going into their assessments. So really working on coaching them through that. We've got Chris Fudge and Jordanos Tessima talking about the big lifts. They're going to do 2 sessions on coaching the big lifts, squat and deadlift specifically. And then we also have great sessions on body inclusive training and so much more. So I'm really excited to have as many of you as possible at these sessions. So why don't we go over to some questions for you. We had a question from Stephanie, who's one of our pro trainers. And she says that her understanding, this is about mobility stability when Eddie was talking about this at the beginning, the understanding that flexibility is the ability to move a joint through a full range of motion, and mobility is being able to move the joint efficiently through one full range of motion, combining strength, flexibility, and stability. Eddie, Jason, do you want to comment kind of on the definitions of mobility for us here at all?
Yeah, we can kind of split it up. This is a bit of not a rabbit hole. So one of the easiest things I would say is mobility can be influenced on the spot, flexibility can't, right? So I can't increase massive flexibility in somebody I want to parse how I say this. They're both in regards to moving a joint through its range of motion, right? Flexibility is, if you think of it over time, right? How mobile somebody can be over time through static stretching, through mobility, through end range of motion, adding, intensity to end range of motion and getting through some of the plastic ranges of motion there. When we're talking mobility and stability, specifically in the context of program design and what we're doing here, it's more about, okay, we're doing some overhead pressing. The lat is a limiting factor in that and their ability to go overhead. What can I do to increase the range of motion on the spot for that in regards to mobility, and then immediately stabilize so that new range of motion, the brain has proprioception there that we can stabilize so that they're safe when they're moving into that motion. Jason can go a little bit deeper into this if he wants. Think of it when we're talking mobility and stability in context of program design for the workout, it's what joint needs to be mobile to get through end range of the motion, and then how do I stabilize there before I start adding load? That's what I meant in the context of mobility and stability. Move the joint through the motion, be able to stay there safely. Jason, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so adding on to that, there's different organizations and different studies will define mobility versus flexibility differently, which can sometimes make it really challenging to communicate those concepts. There was actually a position paper released, I think I want to say 2021, about how periodization uses inconsistent terminology, thus making all periodization studies like really challenging to dig through. Same thing is true of a lot of things like flexibility and mobility. Most of the time, I refer to mobility as active range of motion or dynamic range of motion, and flexibility as passive range of motion. And then building off of what Eddie said, we can usually influence active range of motion or mobility very, very swiftly. Whereas improving that passive range of motion requires repeated application of increasing stimulus. So you want to get a little bit more flexible, you can do some stretching. You want to get a lot more flexible, now we're introducing weighted stretches, contract, relax, end range of motion stuff, and it becomes a lot more complicated. Mobility is usually just how much sort of active range of motion somebody needs in order to perform a given activity. So when we're giving people mobility exercises, the goal should be, we just want them to be able to better perform the things that are necessary for that person's performance.
Thank you to you both. So moving on, we've got another question from Jody Boatger, who's one of our fantastic pro trainers out in Calgary. But before I get to that, just folks who are still on the call, you will get the handout. It was put in the chat box as a download document, so I'm not sure if everybody got that depending on the device you're on. So you will get that handout sent to you in the email with the replay of this session. So that's going to be there. And we also have a feedback survey we would love for you to fill out too. So Jody's asking about RPE. She's saying, you know, rate of perceived exertion, it's a blunt measurement through, and as your session continues, like obviously RPE is going to naturally accumulate, and it's so highly subjective to the client. So how do you account for that? Like if you're giving them RPE ranges and it's so subjective?
All right, so I mean, geeking out on this at like the absolute highest level, I have in fact made an artificial intelligence in Excel that can dynamically suggest a change in load in order to hit a target RPE range. So in my experience, individuals who have an older training age, so individuals who are capable of moving more weight, and individuals who are physically larger, typically accumulate more fatigue as the session goes on. And so their first set of an RPE 8, let's say, is 225 pounds. Then their second set of the same exercise as an RPE 8 is going to be, you know, a reduction of 5% or 10% or whatever. And I'm going to achieve that by asking them, getting them to rate every single one of their sets. And then I can just scroll back in the spreadsheet and make sure that I'm adapting based on their previous performance. So I'm training Eddie. We're bench pressing. It's Eddie. So obviously it's 7 plates per side for sets of 10. And I know that the last time we did this, he rated his first set at that weight at 7 plates at an 8, second one at a 9, third one at a 10. So I know that if I plug that into my calculator, I need to reduce from 7 plates to 6 1/4 and then 6 to have him training at the same RPE from set to set. And I could also play with other variables. I could increase the rest time, for example. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And it really just sort of hinges on, am I getting the feedback that I need from my client and from my own coach's eye? If I see the sets deteriorating, am I dynamically adjusting the load or the rest to meet the person where they are?
Do you have anything to add in there, Eddie, or?
There's nothing I could make more clear than what Jason just said. So that's learning from the best right there.
All right. And Jody says actually that question was from Karen Salenzi, who's another amazing pro trainer with Canfit Pro. So thank you. Love having all these pro trainers on the call. Thank you very much, Karen. We do have another question just to wrap up from Dale. But before I get to that, I just wanted to ask you both, at the Canfit Pro Global Conference and Trade Show that you're presenting at, will you be able to explain more deeply how you actually break this down for clients in terms of how you explain their periodized plan, how you explain the programs to them? Because I think that's going to be really helpful to kind of put it, you know, it's one thing to have a trainer's perspective on it, but how the client's going to respond to that, that language might be a little different. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's something both Jason and I make a focus on is how our clients understand what we're talking about. We get all excited about the nuts and bolts of program design, and in most cases, they don't care. Yeah, so they just, how do I get to B? I don't care about the line between A and B. So I don't want to speak for Jason, but I'm sure this is a big part of what he does as well, just from working with him, is we're going to, explain how we deliver that information. So it's not overwhelming to the client, but they get the belief in the process, right? Of, hey, this is a science. This is how we're going to get you here. How you explain that matters to display both confidence and competence and to build their trust in you. And it's easier than people might think it is, right? Taking the client-focused approach and taking some of the science, not taking the science out of it, but then how we talk to the client, just relating it back to their goals. Absolutely is going to be a big part of what we do there.
So building off what Eddie was just saying, generally speaking, your client doesn't care, but it's important to your client to know that you as the trainer know the why behind it. So something that I've found to be effective as an educator is to use real case studies, to use actual anecdotes. And as a working trainer who is still working full time with clients, I could walk into that, to any education session and pull an example up from that day or the day before or the week before that makes it relevant to everyone in the class, because it's going to be fresh and it's going to be real. So just drawing on, there's the theoretical and then there's the practical. And marrying those two things together is where the rubber really meets the road. And as a continuously working trainer, I have a lot of that practical experience that I can draw on. I can come into the class and be like, hey, this awesome thing happened yesterday, and here are all the steps that got us to that awesome thing.
Yeah, these are going to be great sessions. I really hope that folks can attend our conference and see you in action in person. Last question, and this is related to the glucose tolerance. Jason, Dale was wondering, does overtraining make glucose tolerance worse? And I know that was kind of like a technical question.
Yeah, so this is a fairly new research study. So this is 2021. I was actually just reading it this morning and trying to understand it as best as I can because I'm not a biologist. But essentially, it looks like high intensity endurance training downregulated mitochondrial function and glucose tolerance. So basically what that means is overreaching or overtraining appears to impair glucose tolerance. So an individual who is in an overtrained or an overreaching or an under-recovered state is not going to process glucose into glycogen in their muscles as effectively, and then they're not going to be able to convert the stored glycogen into energy as effectively as somebody who has had adequate rest time. And they actually used, speaking of blocks, they used a wave-loaded periodization. In this study, they used a 4-week block, and they found that the 3rd week is actually the week that had the highest amount of performance impairment. So having a deload after 3 weeks, I know that that's something that kind of like we stumbled upon practically, but there seems to be a physiological reason for that. And it's kind of neat when these things happen. It's like, oh, we've done this way out of tradition. And then someone comes out with a paper and they're just like, bam, here's the rationale for why.
Thanks so much. I know that you're very much evidence-based and you love researching, and you're so good at explaining kind of what the research means on the floor, on the training floor. So thank you very much for that. Friends, we are going to call this session complete. Thank you so much for being here. Mary is going to put the survey link back into the chat. If you could fill that out for us so we can always improve and learn, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. If you're watching the replay, thanks for catching us on the recording. And we hope to see you in August, either online or at the Metro Toronto Convention Center. Take care, everyone.